Racial covenants were ubiquitous in developing cities and counties across the country in the mid-1900s, and Stearns County was no exception.
So far, we found in St. Cloud, there are 3 neighborhoods in the city of St. Cloud. So what is now called Centennial Park in St. Cloud, what used to be called Memorial Acres is now known as the Fernwood area near Calvary Baptist Church in St. Cloud. And then in East St. Cloud on Riverside Drive. Those are the 3 neighborhoods in the city of St. Cloud. And then in the greater area in Stearns County, there are also racial covenants in Cold Spring around a lake, and then around another lake in Collegeville, and then in Sauk Center. The other thing that we found in St. Cloud that's unique is that in East St. Cloud on Riverside Drive, we found racial covenants that specifically name Indigenous people. This is the first instance of this that we found in racial covenants nationwide. And usually racial covenants will either say anyone who is not white cannot buy or occupy the premises, or they might target particular racial groups like African Americans, Chinese or Japanese people, Jewish people in places like Minneapolis. This is the first time that we've seen Indigenous people, Native Americans specifically targeted in racial covenants.
My name is Peggy Landwehr-Roski, and I'm the archivist for St. Ben's and St. John's. I worked with the students in the honors class who did the original research into restrictive covenants for Professor Brittany Merritt Nash, though there was no evidence of such covenants found in either of the archives. But I had a story to relate about that. In 2017, the Stearns History Museum published an article by St. Cloud State Professor Chris Lehman, who has since done even more research into the history of Black Americans and covenants in Stearns County. And his article was titled Jim Crow in St. Cloud, Restrictive Covenants. In it, he identified several neighborhoods in the vicinity that had such covenants in their deeds, one of which was Islewood Beach, which we know better today as Island Lake Road, which is just south of St. John's on Island Lake. He stated that the residents there included a medical doctor named William Davidson and the College of St. Benedict's Director of Physical Education, Elaine Henke. It caught my attention because I knew of both of those people. Dr. Davidson had been the physician for both St. Ben's and St. John's, and he and his family also lived for a time in the house that later became the president's house at St. Ben's, known as the Zerda House. It has since been torn down. And I had Miss Henke as a Phi Ed teacher myself. And I knew that Elaine shared her house with Dr. Angie Duffner, one of my professors in the English department. So I wasn't surprised when shortly thereafter, Angie related to me how another retired professor, Dr. Joe Ferry, had mentioned reading about their property in the magazine. Angeline was appalled, although one of them initially mistook the covenant to say that the land could never be sold to a Native American. Angie emailed me about it. So these are her words. Astonishing. We European immigrants forcibly took the land away from the natives who had lived on it for thousands of years. Then we turned around to arrogantly claim that they could never live there again. I think that Joe expected me to be amazed by his news, but several years ago I had read the original legal description of the property and so had come upon the astonishing claim very close to the opening of the document. I remember thinking then, there's no way such a prohibition would survive in court today. It's a fully bald announcement of discrimination. She didn't know that such an attempt had been tried before or that it had a name. So then I double-checked my facts and got back to her that the covenants weren't about restrictions concerning Native Americans necessarily, but it was all non-Caucasians, or in another example, people of Negro, Chinese, or Japanese races who were to be restricted from purchasing these properties. So I felt it was important to register on their behalf and on my own how atrocious these legal covenants were and what an awful legacy they left, even here in rural central Minnesota.
My name's Doris Motter. I live in the Fernwood neighborhood. There's about 100 houses in this community. I live in a house that was built in about 1950, and so it was a part of the St. Cloud Township for 20 years. There's kind of an interesting history to the development of this area because it was a township property, but it was actually part of a farm owned by Allen and Fern Atwood. When we bought the house, we got the abstract of title, and that's where the restrictive covenants are outlined. Restrictions on who could buy and sell the house were outlined in number 6 on this amendment, and it says, no lot, plot, or parcel shall be sold, leased, mortgaged, used, or occupied, but nor any right thereto be granted, given, or permitted to any person other than a member of the Caucasian race, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by persons of other races in domestic service upon such premises. So you could not sell your home to someone of color, but you could have people who worked at your home, and it sounds like could live at your home if they were servants as described here.
For some of the larger neighborhoods, like in what is now Centennial Park, those were created by developers from the Twin Cities or from outside of the St. Cloud area. And so they would have developed neighborhoods in larger metro areas and then come to St. Cloud and developed identical neighborhoods with the exact same racial language in their deeds. But some were also local families. So the one in Collegeville, for example, was created by a local family. They saw that the Island Lake neighborhood as an investment for their family, and they wanted to protect that investment and have that selling point for potential homeowners and home buyers. And so some of it were local families, some were outside real estate developers and investors. In East St. Cloud, where we found the covenants that identify indigenous people, those were important men in Sauk Rapids who were local to the area and were really involved in things like the Rotary Club and civic life. So it was really a mix of people from in St. Cloud and then outside the area.
I saw those as preventative measures just to keep any possible new African American neighbors from moving in. So the demographics of St. Cloud were roughly identical from before the covenants to right after the covenants were introduced.
As the topic of racial covenants becomes more well-known and well-researched, it is becoming clear that they were a widespread staple of that time period. Though the prejudiced motivation behind these racial covenants is clear, their existence in places like Stearns County is puzzling because there was still a low percentage of non-white individuals in the county after the Great Migration. It's worth investigating whether these racial covenants impacted the economic development of different areas within Stearns County.